Hello, my name is Kerry Arthur, and today we're going to have a little chat about positivity in Warhammer 40,000 and why you should be happy all of the time with no exceptions ever. That's not true. That's not even remotely what we're going to talk about. Let's just get into it, shall we? So this is basically brought on because there's an interesting reaction to quite a few videos on this channel. There's quite every single video on this channel. There's always someone who accuses me of being too positive, and there's always someone who accuses me of being too negative. Now, it's not the same person every single time, it kind of varies, but it kind of got me thinking about the interesting way in which, essentially, it's so easy to be negative about things that we really like, and in this case, Warhammer 40k. And that actually, in a lot of contexts, the negative kind of approach to things, or negativity that might be shown towards certain things that Games Workshop does, in a weird way is kind of coming from a positive place. So hear me out on this, because you might need a little bit of convincing. Also, a good example of this kind of thing is a few people said that I was very negative in that video I did with Arch, and listening back, maybe there was too heavy a lean on the negative angle, but that's mostly because I should have provided more context as to where that was coming from, which is, in a weird way, a positive place as opposed to a negative place. So, let's take a few examples. Let's talk about models. Now, I have frequently, in the past and in that video with Arch, and will most likely do in the future, thoroughly taken the piss out of the quality of older models when it comes to Games Workshop stuff. Not just 40k, just old models in general. My favourite tale of old models is, of course, the metal Demon Prince, which was awful. It was a terrible model. It looked fine if you could ever put it together, but it was so badly cast so often that it was just a literal nightmare. Same thing with the original Nightbringer for the Necrons. Now, I don't know what the current Nightbringer kit looks like. I should ask my friend Mike, actually, because he's got one. But when I had a Nightbringer, and this was back when, hilariously, the Zatanna were actual gods, so the Nightbringer on the tabletop wasn't a shard of the Nightbringer, it was just the Nightbringer, which every now and again I see people go, oh, I don't like the way they nerfed the Zatanna. They nerfed them because the Zatanna was supposed to be powerful enough to eat stars, and yet you could field it on the tabletop, which is laughably daft. Something that never made sense to me, even as a Necron player when they got their first codex back in 3rd. But that was the same thing. Like both the Demon Prince model and the Nightbringer model had the same kind of format, which was essentially you took the body, then you sliced it in half like that, and then you had to glue it together. Except it never worked like that because the casts were not good, the surfaces were not even, and they didn't actually glue together. They more just sort of slightly stuck until you absolutely needed to move them, and then they would snap in half. Not great. Awful. Same thing with the metal Chaos Dreadnought. The actual models, quality. I love the model. I've got it somewhere around here. I still have it in this room. It was on display. Now I'm wondering where I've put it. But I love that model. But me and Arch had a good laugh about the fact that the spike on the top of it was made of thin, flimsy metal and was always bent, even in the official artwork, even on the box for the product was clearly a little bit badly designed. Now that's obviously negative statements. That's negativity. That's taking the piss out of something. But it's so easy to be so negative about that stuff because the relative quality is through the roof. Outside of a couple of bad experiences with Failcast, plastic models from Games Workshop, I cannot remember the last time I've had an issue with a plastic model from Games Workshop. I cannot remember the last time I've had an issue with a large model from Games Workshop. Like, that Imperial Knight behind me, right there, that is a big model. Back in the day, that would fill me with dread trying to put that together. I would just assume that things wouldn't fit, that parts wouldn't click together properly. I would make the assumption that somewhere something's going to have to be pinned because there's absolutely no way that it would be strong enough or stable enough to actually be attached for more than a day and a half, and if I ever had to travel with it, well, that would be game over for the poor thing. that went together like a dream. It was so nice to put together. It's one of the nicest models I've ever built. And yet, compare that, something of that size, to a Demon Prince. You would think that the Demon Prince would have been an easy thing to put together. But no, it was awful back in the day. It was absolutely garbage. It's that positive experience now that makes it so easy to be negative about back then, because generally speaking, I can't think of a shitty kind of modelling experience that I've had recently. I can't think of any model where I've sat down to put it together and come away frustrated or unable to do it, or needing to drill holes through it, or ram it full of green stuff. That just hasn't happened. My overall experience in terms of 40k, when it comes to modelling and painting, is now just 100% positive all the time. The worst thing I've had to deal with in the last couple of years, is putting together the Typhon Heavy Siege tank. And even then, I don't even really count that, because that's Forge World, that's not Games Workshop. Forge World, in terms of putting stuff together, and in terms of the hobby, I always feel is like the next step from Games Workshop. Rightly or wrongly, that's just the way it kind of feels sometimes. I guess it's mostly just because of the added cost of all of that stuff. It feels like it's the elite level, even if putting stuff together from there is actually, for me, worse than putting together stuff from Games Workshop. But that overall positive experience, that fact that I can just buy something and I know that it's all going to fit, it's going to fit together well, it's going to take little to no effort to actually get it stuck together, and it's probably going to be decent to paint on top of that. That is pretty much as positive as you can possibly get, which makes it very easy to be negative about how crappy some of the old stuff was. I mean, actually, a good example of that is the Demon Prince model that you can get now, which is not the same. It's similar, I guess, but I have put together a plastic Demon Prince, and my inclination as soon as I opened it was to think, this is going to be a nightmare, because the last time I did this 15 years ago was a nightmare. Funnily enough, absolutely not. Not a single issue with that kit at all. And it's not even a newer kit, it's an older kit anyway. The positive makes it easier to be negative, especially about the older stuff. It's the same thing with Games Workshop as a company. Like, me and Arch talked a lot about how kind of crap Games Workshop used to be, frankly. How there was no communication, how there was very little in the way of community. I mean, the community had to build itself, because Games Workshop wasn't going to waste the time doing it. There was no interaction, there was no communication. If you ever did get a reply to an email, in my experience, it tended to be quite short, and a lot of the time they hadn't actually read what you'd put. My key thing from remembering that was trying to get clarification for the 13th Company, which was it was an army that you got in Codex Eye of Terror, which dropped, I think it was for the 13th Black Crusade campaign, like a big global campaign that went on. And this is the original 13th Black Crusade, not the one that we just had, which gets confusing. It's been retconned quite severely, because I remember playing my Iron Warriors, because I was on the side of Chaos for the original 13th Black Crusade. And there was a rule for the 13th Company of Space Wolves, which the kits were half Space Wolf and half Chaos, because they'd been in the warp for so long and they'd had to take armour out. Couldn't have any vehicles. You could have bikes, but no vehicles at all. And you could only have 750 points worth of models per HQ slot. And of course, back then you were using just the Force Organisation chart. There was only one. There was no such thing as detachments. There was none of that shit. It was just, you had, if I remember correctly, it was the 3 HQs, 3 fast attack, 3 elites, 3 heavy support, 6 troops. And there were associated transports as well, but they didn't count in any slot, I seem to remember. It was 15 years ago, give me a break. Which is one of the things that I loved about the Iron Warriors, because you could sacrifice 2 fast attack slots for an extra heavy support slot, which led to my... Oh, and they could take Basilisks as well, which led to my lovely army of 2 Defilers, a Basilisk and a Land Raider, which would probably go some way to explaining why we only ever paid games that were about 2,500 points and took all fucking day. What was I talking about? Yeah, so the 13th Company thing of only 750 points per HQ slot which led me to think, because we always played massive, ridiculous games, well, hang on, surely that means I can only have 2,250 points worth of stuff in this army. Is that accurate? Is that right? So I emailed Games Workshop and I said, hey, so in the codex it says this, this and this. Does this mean I can only have 2,250 points worth of units in a single 13 company army? And the response I got was, yes, as per the force organisation chart, you can only have 3 HQs. Not the question I asked, even remotely. It just quoted part of my own question back to me and said, yes, you have 3 HQs. To which my question was, if I have 3 HQs, does that mean I'm capped at 2,250 points? It didn't address that. It was just, yes, you can have 3 HQs. That's not great. That was a bad experience. That was like a rubbish experience. It was just like, I did ask the question, right? And I went back and I checked. Yeah, I did ask the question. Compare that to now. Not that long ago, I can't remember what model it was now. I got a Finecast model from Games Workshop, and it was gash. It was awful. It was just like the cast was really low quality. Bubbles everywhere, there's flashing all over it, almost impossible to remove as well, and the detail was like it was almost smudged. I don't know how you smudge resin, but that's what it was like. And I emailed and said, hey, this isn't great, could I send it back and replace it with another one? Fully expecting something in the line of, you can send it back, you might have to pay for postage or whatever. I was thinking, alright, I mean, I'll hopefully they can get another one to me. I'll accept that, that's fine. No, it was just outright, okay, no problem, here's another one. And they just sent it to me. That one wasn't good either. It was not great. Now, you could say this is being negative again, but it's not, because I had a problem with the model. I said, hey, there's a problem with this model. And they went, here's another model. No charge, nothing. We don't want the other one back. We're just going to send you another one. The other one was not good. It had the same issues. And I said, I'm really sorry. I will provide pictures and stuff, but it's no better than the first one. Could I exchange it for another? To which they went, don't send it back to us. No, just have another one. And then they sent me another one, except they didn't, because they sent me 2. So that's 4 models that I bought 1, I got 4. 2 of them were not good. But then they just kept sending me them until I got a decent replacement for it. At no extra charge, at no questions asked. It was just, oh, the model's not good? Have another. It's on us, don't worry about it. That's outstanding. I cannot think of another, like, if you think of companies that are equivalent in terms of their kind of grip on an industry. So I'd say it's probably factually accurate to say that Games Workshop is at the top of the miniatures industry. They're like the biggest company. They're the most well-known company, I would argue. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. If you look at, say, let's look at video games. I would argue that Steam is the biggest digital distributor, which I think is fair. And if you email Steam, you don't get jack shit back. You get nothing. You may as well not exist. They're not going to acknowledge you. They're not going to help you. You can have a ticket open for months. I have had this experience myself. I mean, compare that to Games Workshop, where you say, hey, I've got a problem with this model, and they've sent you a new one the next day. That's ridiculous. And when you look at the rest of Games Workshop, the overall quality of models is way up. Like, a lot of the stuff for Age of Sigmar, whether you like Sigmarines or not, I think the quality of them is pretty fucking good. Whether you like the new Witch Elves and Marathi and all of that, the quality of them seems to be ridiculously good. The sculpts are really good. The casts always end up being good. I never have an experience where I'm like, oh, this model didn't work. It just doesn't happen. Same thing with like the Warhammer community. It's so easy to be negative about old Games Workshop, because when you look at what Games Workshop does now and compare it to the old days, it may as well be brand new. They may as well just be a brand new company. They have the Warhammer community website now, which is full of information. It's full of helpful information at that. Yes, a lot of it is, this is why you should buy this, but it's at least written in an engaging, sensible way. Look at the way that they treat the different factions when it comes to doing the spotlights for different codexes. Now, yeah, Space Marines did get a lot of attention. That's not to be unexpected. I mean, they are one of the bigger factions. They have so many sub-factions that it's difficult not for them to have a significant amount of attention on the run-up to the release of their codex. But if you look at how much Games Workshop has actually pushed the other Xenos factions, how hard they pushed Imperial Guard, just how hard they've pushed, like, I mean, Eldar had a whole week. Tyranids had a whole week. Even Chaos Demons, whilst it wasn't as in-depth as some of the others, had a decent amount. I mean, that's Games Workshop dedicating time to factions that aren't their poster boys, that aren't their golden tickets. That alone is a vast improvement. The fact that the community site exists in the first place is something that should be celebrated at every possible opportunity. I mean, Jesus Christ, they've gone from having no web presence, no community presence, no interaction, to having a fully functional battle station, obligatory, isn't it? Like a fully functioning community website where they interact with their customers, they interact with the user base, they interact with the fan base, they actively try and involve the community. They have their Facebook page, which is so ridiculously active compared to so many other companies that are far bigger than Games Workshop and could easily achieve the same thing. It's so easy to be negative about Games Workshop of old because Games Workshop now is so much better that you cannot even believe it. It's not even, like I say, it's like a different company entirely. They're selling the same products, which are of a higher quality, yeah, but the overall attitude and the overall way in which they conduct themselves, it's absolutely fantastic. It's impossible to not be positive about some of the vast majority of what Games Workshop does. Now, of course, in some cases, it still can lead to negativity. For instance, the Custodes launch. I thought that was a misstep. I mean, I'm a hypocrite because I bought them, but I would still argue that it was a misstep because the player base were getting excited for the year of the Xenos. Whether or not Games Workshop ever used that phrase, it still gained traction, and I think they would have been sensible to pay attention to that. But the reason for the negativity there is that, as missteps go, it was a fairly big one, I think. And Games Workshop just aren't making that many missteps. They're not fucking up that often. I mean, in fact, they're rarely fucking up, if you ask me. They're doing such a good job of everything that when they do something that is like, oh, hang on, what was that for? It really stands out. It's kind of, it's easy to look at that bit of negativity because everything else is so positive. Something else, and this was something that was brought up specifically to me by someone who felt that things were just got way too negative when I was talking to Arch. The Gathering Storm storyline. Now, I said in that video, I talked about the Horus Heresy, but I think it's worth reiterating again. I find it very easy to be negative about the Gathering Storm storyline, about just the general quality of those books, about the rushed nature of it, about the way characters didn't seem to really do what you'd expect them to do, that, you know, Space Marines didn't act like Space Marines and Eldar didn't act like Eldar, and it felt very rushed, and it felt relatively low quality in terms of both writing and just narrative content as a whole. Now, again, that's negative, but it's negative because this is the same company that has the Horus Heresy, and the Horus Heresy is one of the best book series that I've read. Like, I really like reading a lot, and I also have a serious problem where if a series hasn't grabbed me by 2 books in, the chances are it's never going to get looked at again. I don't know how many books in we are for the Horus Heresy, but I've read all of them. Yes, there are misses in there. There are books that are not as good as other books. But overall, the vast majority of the Horus Heresy books are really good books. They're really good stories. They have really good narratives. They have really good characters. They have really good development of those characters and of the setting in which they are set. It's like, it's easy to be negative about the Gathering Storm stuff because it's comparable, unfortunately, in a way, to the Horus Heresy, which contains some of my favourite sci-fi books, just full stop. Not just in the Horus Heresy, but just of sci-fi writing as a whole. The First Heretic is ranked up there as one of my favourite books of all time. When you compare that with the Gathering Storm stuff, it's just not as good. And it's easy to be negative about that because there is an element of disappointment there where it's like, I so wanted this to be better. You know, this is the standard this feels like the standard that everything else should live up to. And it's a lot to live up to, in fairness. You know, the Horus Heresy is a massive undertaking. But it's hard not to do that comparison. And it's hard not to be negative about it, because that comparison is the not great thing compared to the really, really good thing. Like, I'm so positive towards the Horus Heresy series as a whole that when I compare something that is as lackluster as the Gathering Storm, it's hard not to be overly negative, because it's like, but you could have been this good, and you're not. Finally, I think, for closing thoughts on this 20-minute long ramble, no matter how much you love something, no matter how much you invest in terms of time, in terms of money, in terms of attention, in terms of self, how much of yourself you invest into something, you're never gonna find it to be 100% good all of the time. You know, the example that I would use in terms of just a very popular piece of media is Game of Thrones. It's entirely possible to be negative about stuff that happens in Game of Thrones, because some of it isn't great. And yet at the same time, I've watched all of it. I've watched some of it multiple times. If I didn't like it, then I wouldn't keep watching it. And it's the same thing with Warhammer 40k. I've been involved in this hobby one way or another for 15 years, since 3rd edition. We're now in 8th edition. I don't want to think about how much time and how much money I've spent on this, because I would probably... no, I wouldn't think there's something better to do with it, because I don't think that's true. I think I would just be genuinely shocked at how much it is. But you cannot be involved with something and have a serious amount of passion for something and not be critical of it. You can't love something unconditionally to the point where you will overlook flaws, where you will just go, I like that even though it doesn't make any sense, or, you know, it's not possible to be 100% positive all the time. The key is to remember why you're being negative, and that's what I always do. When I'm being negative about something Games Workshop does, it's usually because I'm relating it to something overwhelmingly positive. If I'm annoyed at something that happens in Warhammer 40k in terms of the lore or the overall narrative, whatever, it's because I'm comparing it to things like the Horus Heresy, which is overwhelmingly positive. If I get frustrated with something that Games Workshop does in terms of releases, and I'm negative, it's because I think they've done a fucking good job with releases overall, because the rest of it is overwhelmingly positive. It's entirely possible to be both positive and negative about something that you love, and it's incredibly easy to look at what someone else says when they say something negative and say, if you don't like it, why are you still here? Well, they're still here because they have a love for the setting as a whole, for the game as a whole, for the hobby as a whole. It's just that specific thing they didn't like, and that's okay. Good grief. That's like 25 minutes of just rambling about stuff. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I don't really know what you could let me know about. I guess whether you agree with anything I've said, whether it just sounds like gibberish, whether you think it is possible to be like only positive, or whether you think it's possible to be only negative about something that you care about. Actually, that'd be interesting to see if you think you can be only negative about something you care about. Let me know in the comments below. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching. There's a few things to click on the screen. There's a couple of videos, Patreon, subscribe, all of that stuff. Click it if you like, don't click if you don't want to, and I will see you for the next video. Toodaloo.